Hi, I'm Keith Whitelock and welcome to Watercolor Workshop. For today's demo, I'm going to do a Chesapeake Bay log canoe under sail. The sails are white, the boat is white, but we don't have any white paint to work with. But with transparent watercolor, it's not a problem. We'll use all that white paper. I'll show you how we'll treat that. Here's the sketch for our log canoe painting. And the background's going to be somewhat dark. The water is going to be sort of a mid-tone, and we're going to get these sails to pop away from the background clouds by basically just adding a few shadows in here. But we're going to start with wet into wet clouds, and I'm not going to paint the entire area with clear water this time. We're going to have to cut around all of the areas that we want to save because we do want some hard lines around the sails. I have transferred the basic outlines onto the paper, so the first thing I want to do is get some nice clear water and start cutting around all of these sails. I'm going to use a 1-inch brush and just carefully paint this water right up to the edge of the sails. And I'm going to carry that right down to the horizon line. Since I don't have nice white paint to paint in these sails later, we have to save it. Now I could use something like masking fluid to do this, but that's better for just a little tiny item here and there, like we've used on flower petals or perhaps just a part of a dock. And I'll kind of give it a look, see how shiny it is. And looks like we've covered just about everything. So now we're going to want to jump in with a little bit of color. I've pre-mixed just a little bit of an orangey color here. This is a little vermilion, just a little bit of cadmium yellow. And we'll just dabble a little of that down here near the horizon. It looks a little strong, but when this paper dries out, we won't be able to see that anywhere near as obviously as we see it right now. And to get our cumulus type clouds, we'll use a little phthalo blue. I'm going to take just a little touch of this on the brush and mix it into some previously mixed phthalo blue. And to get our clouds, we'll just paint roughly around the top of a few, pulling it up into the top of the paper. And where the blue sky meets the sails, I'll be just a little careful not to overpaint those sails. And we'll paint around a few more cloud tops. You'll notice I'm just using the corner of the brush to do this drawing. Flat brushes are great for making sort of nice straight little lines, but in this case we do want them to look soft. And now we'll just blend this blue out to the edges. And I think we're just about finished with that. As it sits and I want to hurry along, I can take a dry paper towel and soak up just a little bit of that water that's in the tree line. Go back into the palette, take some more of this blue. I'll add just a little bit of brown. That'll maybe a touch of sepia, because I don't want a terrifically bright blue water. And to run this wash smoothly, we'll start at one edge, tilt the paper slightly. I'll cut up close to that horizon line. And paint carefully around the sail. Let's bring this wash along. Now I'll take the nice square edge of this brush and paint right around the shape of the hull of the boat. Now I do want some nice white reflections, so I'm going to zigzag just a little of this color in my wave area, like so. And a little later, if I want some white highlights from these sails in the water, it'll already be there. As long as I keep pulling this nice wet edge along to the other side of the paper, I'll get a pretty even wash. I think what I'm going to do first is actually just take a little yellow ochre, and I'm going to use a round brush. This is a number 10. And add maybe a little burnt sienna to that, and maybe even just a little touch of burnt umber. I want a slightly yellow, warmish bit of brown, and I'm going to run that little bit of brown right along my horizon line and indicate a little bit of a beach in the background. But holding the paper upside down lets me cut across and just put that little brown line in. I'm going to add a little phthalo blue here with a little yellow ochre. This will give me a slightly grayed green, but it's not a really brilliant green. We don't want it to get the Crayola look. And just to get the tops of the trees a little irregular, I'm just going to dance this brush along the top and leave a little bit of white space. This little bit of white that I've left can be broken up with a few dots and dashes. The trees will be a little darker here and there. It'll suggest buildings in the background. Perhaps just a touch right along the shoreline itself. Now, with our background established, I'd like to play with the waves a little, so I'll take a small amount of the phthalo blue, add a little brown to it, and using a stylized, almost calligraphy stroke, I'm going to indicate some wave peaks. And it's good that they're light right now. This just lets me plan and play with where I want them. If I were to put the very darkest ones in right now and then want to change my mind, that's one of the things that watercolor won't exactly let you do. I won't be able to lighten them up to make me really happy, but by painting lightly first and then gradually making them darker, it will look much more natural and realistic. I really like a flat brush for doing this kind of work. I will just use it to kind of print and stipple little waveforms off into the background. As they do retreat into the background, we want to keep them smaller and smaller and lighter so that the perspective effect makes the water look realistic. By varying the size and the slight color of these waves as we establish them, that's one thing that will really help with the realism. At this point, I'll throw in just a little brown to indicate either a slight muddiness to the water, or even the yellow will indicate perhaps some of the sandy bottom reflecting. Your best guide to what color to paint water is to actually study the real subject itself. The color of the water will change very significantly due to clouds, whether or not the water in fact is muddy, and the direction that you're actually looking. The water will get much more silvery looking as you look sort of into the sun, into the light source. Now, to make our sails pop out, we're going to need to add some shadows. So I'll start with a little phthalo blue. This is a rather light wash, and we'll add a small amount of brown, of burnt umber, to that. I want them dark enough to jump out a little bit, but I don't want them to really just overpower everything. So we'll get this light wash. I'll throw the sketch back on here for a minute and we'll get an idea about where these shadows come along. This is more of an overhead lighting. The light is not very strongly coming from one side or the other, so we'll just get where the sail sort of sags out here and leaves these shadows. I do need a nice straight line here, and that's perhaps a little tricky thing to do. But I'll try to make do with that using my ruler or straight edge. I think that's about what I want. A little more water in that, and the trick to remove the water is we'll just dry the brush slightly and put that dried brush right back in there, and it will drink up all that excess water. Same trick, a lot of water, dry the brush. After you paint with watercolor long enough, you'll learn to really control this amount of wetness on the paper for both your brush strokes and washes. Now we need to put a little bit of a shadow on the boat hull itself. So we'll use that same light blue and just drag it across. Now for our figures, I'm going to use just a little cadmium orange. I'm going to touch that with a little bit of burnt sienna. I could go with a little red, but maybe I'll save most of that for shadows. Touch of yellow ochre. Now for very small figures like we have on this boat, we do not need to get into a great deal of sharp detail. I'll use a little of this blue color. If these fellows all happen to be wearing white shirts, for example, that will indicate the shadows on their clothes. Now while the figures are damp, I'll mix up a little reddish brown and use that to paint in the bottom of the boat. And I like to spin this painting around so that I can pull that little line in the direction I want a little easier. I'll use some of that same color for this mast. The interesting thing about the real log canoes is that they're so top heavy with the tall sails and the masts that they would really like to blow over in a little bit of wind. So the crew has to take these long boards, almost like something off of a seesaw, and every time the boat changes tacks, they have to jump out and drag these boards around, prop them up underneath, sit on them, and then scoot back and forth to try to help balance the boat. Sometimes on a bad day, a gust of wind or a slight miscalculation will result in folks going overboard for an unplanned swim. I don't have to strictly use the flat brush for the water. Any place that I decide I want a few of these little darker specks of blue, as long as I have it on the brush, I can hop right in and add some of that here and there. I'm at that stage of the painting now that I refer to as picking at it. I can kind of jump around and just look it over, and if I think a little area is a little weak, we'll add some color or a shape here and there. Now, one last thing that will make these sails look realistic is the addition of some of the seam lines . Some people think I'm using a very, very tiny brush for little details where you just have one line or one string. But if the brush points well, you can put little tiny ropes and things in with a much larger brush than you'd think. We'll take one last comparison with the sketch. I think we have just about what we want. I'm going to pick at the water just a wee bit more, and then we're going to call this one finished. I'm going back to the phthalo blue and adding just a small amount of brown, burnt umber to be exact, with the flat brush. And where I wanted my most obvious wave tops, I'll just jump in. Use that little calligraphy motion. Try to let that brush mimic some wave action as it does what I want. I'll try to get just a bit stronger shadow underneath the boat. And as long as I have that little bit of blue here, I might just touch some of those white spots in the distance. And I think I have just about what I want. Of course, I can always go back in at any time later and add a couple of things. but I think this has the effect I was looking for. After looking at this for a minute, I've decided I need one last little thing. I'm using a scratch board tool to just slightly tear away a bit of paper so it indicates a little bit of white in the water where the boat is breaking up the waves. And that captures a Chesapeake Bay log canoe under sail. I think now's a great time to stop. If we keep picking at the water, we'll overwork the painting and we want it to look spontaneous. As you can see, we made that just fine without the white paint. We just saved the white paper. That's a critical element of transparent watercolor. I hope you enjoyed today's demo. Please join me again here on Pack 14 for Watercolor Workshop. I'm Keith Whitelock.